Hello everybody and welcome. It's Hugh here at Loxone, and we are here with the second of our foundation series webinars. So yesterday we took a look into Loxone, who we are as a company, where we come from, what we do, and why we do some of the things that we do, and what we really see as the future and our vision for the automation market. Now, yesterday was obviously very heavily focused on us, and it was very, very slide heavy. So let's rectify that from today onwards. And so for today, we are going to start looking at config, and we're going to start looking at configuring systems. So we're going to, for today, have an intro to config, how it all works, what the different parts of config mean, and start connecting to a system. In my case, I've got a demo case here, and also looking at some basic levels of configuration. So this is going to be our agenda. We're going to look at inputs and outputs and what they mean. We're going to look at config basics. We're going to look at live view, at simulation, and at connecting to a mini server. Now, I mentioned this yesterday, but if you don't have a mini server, never fear, you can still follow along to all that I'm doing on Config Live. A mini server, like I've got over here, that I will just switch my camera to quickly, is a great option for being able to actually see things working. Oh, let's move that into view. So see things working and actually have a proper overview of them. So you can see there's already configuration on this mini server, and you can see an LED strip is on. So you can actually physically see your things working. So it's a really, really great tool to have. So that is going to be our agenda for today. Now, before we get started, where can you actually get Loxone Config from? Well, Loxone Config is our tool for configuring systems. So this is the installer's tool, the thing that you are going to be using to make these systems work. We provide it free to download. And we always try and provide two different versions that you can download. The first version is the release version. This is the version that you should be using on any live installation for a customer. So on our downloads page of our website, you can always download our release version of config just here. As I said, config is Windows only, so Windows 7 or above. In addition to the release version, we also have this link here, which is to our public beta. So what we try and do is we try and keep as many internal releases as we can, internal beta versions, and we try and release them again for free on our website, both app and config, for you to try out any features. So as it says up here, do not use this on a customer installation or a mission critical environment. But feel free to put this on a demo case if you have one. Feel free to put it on your own home and to try out things. And you'll see lists of the new features that will be coming in new config versions, both for config and for app. So I'd advise all of you, if you haven't already got config on your laptop, while I'm waffling on for the next minute or two, quickly whip over to our downloads page, turn those lights off, and get config installed on your laptop. So if we do have config, then this is what it will generally look like when we open it up. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain what the different parts of config are, and then we're going to get involved in actually doing a little bit of configuration. So when you first open up config, it will open up something very similar to this. And what we have is top left, this will always tell us the version number. So on the downloads page of our website, it will tell you what the current release version is. So you will be able to see whether you are whether you are on the release version or not. If there is a later version available, there should also be the option to check for updates, and it will tell you if you're on the most recent version or not. On the left-hand side of the front screen, you have My Projects, which is this list here. So this is all of the config files on your laptop. So the way that it works is when you create a config file, that is saved both on your laptop and you save it into a mini server. So this means that your config file is always in two places. So as long as you make sure you don't delete these or you put them somewhere safe, you have a backup of a file to go back to should anything happen to this version on here and somebody messes it up. You can also create a new project. There is also the option for project planning. Project planning we will cover on the very last session, but essentially allows you to create a bill of materials for a Loxone system. You also have the option to open a config file. So let's say you are going to support a system that already has Loxone installed. Customer has a USB stick with a config file on. You could stick that USB stick in your laptop and open up that config file from that USB stick in your version of config. You also have the ability to search for mini servers on the network that you're connected to. And so what you can do, if you know the username and password for that mini server, you can connect straight to it and it will actually pull the config file off of that mini server onto your laptop. And if you know the external address of a mini server, so a mini server somewhere out in the world that you look after and you don't have a config file for it, you could type in the external address, username and password, and again, connect to it and pull the config file from it. And then finally on here, you can format an SD card. So if you wanted to, let's say, wipe a mini server and put it back to factory settings, you could format a Loxone SD card within config and put it back to factory settings. Okay, brilliant. So we're going to get started with creating a new project. And if you already have config installed on your laptops, I would recommend you follow along with me. So we're going to start at the front page and we're going to create a new project. When you create a new project, it gives you an option of which mini server you would like to create a project for. And so if you remember from yesterday's webinar, we have 3 different mini servers available. We have the mini server. This is our most recent one that we released towards the end of last year that has an inbuilt tree connection and also has a fair bit more processing power. We have the mini server Go. This version is the one that doesn't have any inputs or outputs built into it, but it does have built-in air. So it's designed around retrofit systems. And then we have the mini server Gen 1, and this is the version that is in my demo case here. This is the first generation of the hardwired mini server, contains inputs and outputs on the device. And so because I've got a Gen 1 in this demo case, I'm going to select mini server Gen 1. On the next page, you have to fill in some details about this project. So the first thing you have to fill in is a project description. So this is our foundation series. You also need to fill in an author. You are the author, not me, not Loxone, you. Whoever's creating this file are the author. The reason it's important to correctly put in the author details is that you can display the author in the app, and it can be really useful for us on support if somebody forgets who their installer is. We can say, okay, go here, here, and here, and it should give you details of your installer. So I would be the author, that's our office number, that's our office email. I can also put in a website, and if I wanted to as well, I could also upload an image of our logo, which again, I can get to display on a page in the app. Then we need to fill in our customer details. So this can be my girlfriend, she can be our customer. I'm not going to put in my house address though. I'm going to put in the Loxone office address. And the reason you fill out address is for geo coordinates so that we can get location data for certain things later on. So project description, author, customer details. I'm also a big fan of ticking create project subfolder, so it creates a separate folder on my laptop for every project I create, so it makes it a little bit neater. And this is where it's going to save that config file on my laptop. If you use something like Google Drive or OneDrive for cloud storage, you could put a shared location in there instead and then have these things automatically back up to the cloud. On the next page is users for the system. And so there is always one user on here by default, and that is a user called admin. The username is admin, and the default password is also admin. Admin is what a mini server comes out of the factory configured as. And guess what? That is not very secure. So one of the first things you should always do is change the admin password. So I'm going to make my admin password demo case. All one word, all lowercase. Very, very important that we change the admin password. If you forget your admin password and you've got no record of it, tough. There is no backdoor into this system because that would be a security risk. So please make sure you always remember your admin password or you have a note of it somewhere. Then on every user, you've also got the option for a user interface password. So a user interface password is for the app. There are certain functions where we might want to have a second level of authentication. So as an example of why this is important, or somewhere this could be important, if I have an iPad mounted on my wall as I walk in through the door, and it's always got the Loxone app loaded, if I don't have a user interface password for something like my burglar alarm, then somebody breaks into my house through the front door, it pops up saying the alarm's going off, all they'd have to do is press disarm. And so a user interface password means that they'd also have to put in a password or a code to be able to disarm the alarm. So I'm going to put the user interface password as 1234, very nice and secure. I'm also just going to create one extra user to show you what happens with this. So another user, this is going to be for Hugh. He's going to have my birthday as a user interface password. And I also have the ability to tick administrator. If somebody is an administrator, they can get into config. If they're not an administrator, they can't. You want to create users for everyone who'll be using the system because you can limit certain access to things on the app based on users and user groups. Cool. Then on this page, you get to say what rooms are in the house. So we've got a big old list of predefined rooms. You could also add as many extra rooms as you like. Every room has a room type. There is a few room types that you'll see in there. Pretty much self-explanatory. A bedroom's a bedroom, a living room or kitchen is a recreational room, a hallway is a thoroughfare, whole house or whole building is central, and if you're not sure, it's other. They are used primarily for certain parameters like timeouts of motion sensors, the default parameters, which of course you can change anyway. Star ratings and favorites relate to the app. So we'll come on to those when we get onto the app. And icon, again, relates to the app and the icon of the room within the app. The only thing that is very, very important is room size. Room size is used for calculations with regards to the heating system. So I'm going to leave all of the rooms that are ticked by default ticked, and I'm going to tick the bathroom as well as an extra room. And then on all of these rooms, I'm just going to put in a room size. This is in meters squared. So just put in a room size for all of the rooms in the house. As I said, it is used for heating calculations. Outside obviously doesn't matter because we're not heating the outside. And the same for whole house, doesn't matter because whole house is for global functions. Cool, and that's our rooms. Now, obviously, this isn't the only place we could do rooms and users. We get the option to do them later in config as well. And then the last page, it gives us the option to search for a mini server and to go to online documentation if we've forgotten anything that we've learnt. I'm going to show you how to do all of this though, so we're not going to worry about those. We're just going to press finish. And what happens then is it creates a config file for us. First thing here is this little bar here says foundation series.loxone. That means that that file is saved with that file name on my laptop. If I make any changes to this file, a star gets put after this, and that means that is not saved locally to my laptop. So if there is a star there, it means it's not saved on the laptop yet. Press the little floppy disk, star disappears. Cool. So now that I've got this config file in, to start talking how this config page works and the different places. So first thing, top. This is our ribbon. This ribbon is where we have certain availability of certain things related to what we've got selected. So generally you will see things like the ability to connect to a mini server, to load from a mini server, to save into a mini server, to start doing some diagnostics and some testing features, as well as if we select something specific, it will change to be related to the thing we've selected. Then, if we move a little bit further down, if we go from left to right and explain these panes, the far left-hand pane is what we call parameters. So for every single thing you select, this pane will change to show you the relevant parameters for whatever you've selected. Parameters are the deep drilled down preferences for whatever you've selected. So as an example, lighting, let's say automated lighting, how long the lights stay on after you've left a room and motion isn't being detected anymore. That's a parameter. Serial numbers for devices, parameters. So parameters will change depending on whatever you have selected, and you'll then see all of the available parameters for that. Then we move on to the middle pane. This is our periphery list. This is a list of everything that's available on this project to start configuring with, to make actually do something. And so you can see just by the act of creating a config file, we get a periphery list with a few things in here by default. And that's because these are things that it knows that we have. So we've got, for instance, our rooms list. Those are all of the rooms we ticked earlier, with the room size in, with the icons, with those star ratings. We've got some default categories. We have the users that we created. And we also already have a mini server. Because even though I haven't connected to a mini server yet, I told it that I was using a Gen 1. And so you can see it's already put a Gen 1 mini server in for me. And it is also already put in all of the things that a mini server has on it already. And you can see if I select the mini server that this page changes over here to show me all of those as well. Now, something that I love about config, this is something that I think is so cool, and just those little eyes for detail. Do you notice that when you expand the mini server in the periphery list, we've got digital inputs, so those are contacts that we can wire sensors and switches to that are on or off, open or closed. We've got analog inputs for things like external temperature sensors, digital outputs, those are relays for a contact that open or closes to, say, turn a light on, analog outputs for, I don't know, things like a 0 to 10 volt lighting driver. So all of these we've got on the mini server. And if you look next to the name of each one, there's a little icon that shows you a little symbol that dictates whether it's analog or digital, but also a little color coding. So next to digital, it's green. Next to analog, it's orange. Outputs digital is red, and outputs analog is black. If I move the webcam over to the demo case, and I just stop sharing my screen, so if you take a look at the actual mini server itself, look at the color coding of the terminal blocks on the device itself. Digital inputs are green, analog inputs are orange, analog outputs are black, digital outputs are red. So that color coding that you see in config is carried over to the physical device to give us a really, really easy way of identifying what it is that we're looking at. So that's just, for me, one of the really, really cool things. If I expanded digital outputs, I can see that I've already got 8 available. That's because there are 8 digital inputs on the mini server itself. Cool. And then the third page, this pane here, these are our config pages. So at the moment, if I were to save this file into this mini server, nothing would happen. Absolutely nothing. None of the switches at the top here would work. This wouldn't work. This wouldn't work. Absolutely nothing would work because I haven't configured anything yet. So this third pane, the pages, is where we do our actual configuration. And so without actually having any physical hardware available, I could already start configuring something. And to show you probably the most basic level of configuration available would be connecting an input to an output. So first, let's start by understanding what an input or an output is. I always like to explain it in the way that an input is something that has an effect on Loxone. An output is something that Loxone affects. So to give you an idea, a light switch would be an input because Loxone cannot control whether that light switch is on or off. It's my physical hand that controls that. Loxone has no control of the state of it. Loxone is only looking at what state it's in. And so a light switch would be an input. Same for a motion sensor. Loxone can't control whether there's motion in the room or not. Loxone is just looking at what the state of that is. An output, however, would be something like a physical light or a lighting circuit. Loxone can control the state of this. Loxone can close a relay or adjust a dimmer output to physically alter that lighting circuit. So anything that is affecting the mini server is an input. Anything that the mini server affects is an output. And then digital or analog refers to whether they're just on and off or whether they're a value. So a switch would be digital. It's on or it's off. A brightness sensor, however, would be analog because it's a value. Brightness is not there or not there, it's a certain lux level. And so that is digital and analog inputs and outputs. Now the most basic form of config is connecting an input to an output. So if I show you this, let's take input 1 on our mini server. We select it, we click and we drag it onto a page. That is now the input on the page ready to configure with. We then find an output. So let's take our first relay on our demo case on our mini server. Click and drag, and again, drag it onto a page. You can then see that there are these little dots on each of these. Hover your mouse over so it turns into a hand, click and drag, and draw a line from the input to the output. And that is now a super simple level of config. The next bit I'm going to show you is how we actually connect to a mini server and save this in. So at the top here, you've got this option for connect. If I click this little arrow here, I've got the option to search. That then looks on my network for all of the available mini servers it can find. This is my demo case. You can see it shows me the name. By default, that name will be the serial number of the mini server. I can see what IP address it's on, what its serial number is, and what config version it's on. I would then put in the username and password, which remember is admin by default. And then I've got two options, connect or initial setup. If you have already created a config file and you want to save it into a mini server, choose connect. If you want to connect to the mini server first and then start creating your config, choose initial setup, because initial setup will then look out across the Loxone link and automatically pull the extensions in for you. Because I've started creating a config, I'm going to choose connect. Then it connects to the mini server, or at least it does if I type admin correctly. Here we go. So now that I've connected, you can see that this has changed to say disconnect. And this bar has changed to say that I'm locally connected to Foundation Series mini server. The program's not identical and the serial number is a mismatch. That's because at the moment, my config file has no serial number. And so to rectify this and to get what's on my screen on this demo case, I choose Save in Mini Server. So Save in Mini Server takes it from your laptop and puts it on the mini server. Load from mini server pulls it from the mini server and puts it on my laptop. So I want to save in mini server. It then says, do I want to continue and update the serial number? Yes, I do. Perfect. Wonderful. And now you can see it says program identical. Now, I made a little bit of a boo-boo in that I didn't turn the LED strip off before I did that. The reason the LED strip is still on is because the dimmer for the driver for it now can't connect to the mini server because I've just overwritten all the config, and so it stayed in its last known state. So just ignore the fact that the LED strip is on. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch my webcam back over to the demo case, and I'm going to stop my screen share. So if you remember, I have configured that input 1 is connected to output 1. This is input 1 just here, and this is output 1 just here. So now, when I press that, output 1 goes on. Look at that. That's my config, sorted. Input 1 to output 1. However, as you're probably noticing, the output is only staying on for as long as the input's on. That's because there's a direct line, 1-to-1, drawn between them. So the output is directly following the input. So we can see that if we go back to config, and this is really, really cool with config, when you're connected to a mini server, you've got this option to start live view. And if you press that, then your page here then shows you exactly what is happening live. So if I now trigger this input again, you can see that this goes yellow, and then this goes yellow, and the green, and this line goes green. So you can see in live view exactly what is happening live on the system. Now, this is not how I would want, let's say, a real lighting circuit to work. I would want it that if this was a retractive switch or a momentary switch, that me tapping it would change this output to be permanently on. And then me tapping it again would turn the output back off again. And so this is when the next bit of config comes into play. And this is something called function blocks. Function blocks, which you can see at the ribbon just up here, give us the ability to add logic to this system. So instead of just being dumb, output following input, the output changes its state depending on some logic that happens in between. And so if I click on the little arrow there, you can see that there are loads and loads of different categories for function blocks. And under each category, you can see that there are several function blocks. Now, I think at current number, we're up to about 167 function blocks in config. There are loads of them. But if we think about this really, really logically, let's put this into physical perspective so that we can understand what all of this means. Let's pretend that this input 1 here is my finger. And let's pretend that this actuator relay here is a light circuit. In the real physical world, what would sit in between my finger and a light circuit so that when I tapped with my finger, the light circuit came on? It's a switch. So if I take a look at function blocks, we've got a category buttons, switches. And under here, we have a function block called switch. The description says on-off switch with a trigger to toggle as well as an on and an off. So I select it, it then gives me this function block, which I can drop on the page. And what I now want to do with this is get rid of that line by hovering my mouse over and doing a single left click. And instead, what wants to happen is this input wants to connect on the left-hand side of the function block. So the left-hand side is your input side, and the outputs are on the right-hand side. And my output wants to connect to the right-hand side. So I've now got the input into the trigger and the cue to the output. And I can hover over these inputs and these outputs, and it will open up a pop-up bubble to tell me what they do. Now, to make this go live on the system, I need to remember to save in. So I save in mini server, and that will put this config live. So it's now saying program identical. The mini server's rebooted. If I go back to live view, now watch what happens when I toggle input 1. So I make it momentary. So it just sends a quick signal. Look, it permanently turns the output on. And if I trigger it again, it turns the output back off. So that is the beginnings of something a little bit more clever. If I just, again, stop sharing my screen. Again, ignore the LED strip. That's just staying in its last known state. Toggle that, and that comes on. Toggle it again, and that goes back off again. Brilliant. Another thing to show you, because I am obviously aware that most of you won't have a demo case on you at the moment. If you would still like to test this out and to watch it working, then there is actually another option as well as live view. If you head over to this tab here, testing, you've got the option over here to start simulation. And when you start simulation, you don't need any physical equipment, and you can simulate these things happening. So I can simulate me there, pressing an input, and see what happens on the output. I can even, on this input, if I select it and scroll down to the bottom of the parameters list to where it says simulation live view, I can change how this input appears in simulation mode. Is this input a switch? And by a switch, we mean that when you press it, it stays on. Or you can make it a push button. And by a push button, what we mean is it is momentary. So when you press it, it returns back to its position after you've let your finger go or your mouse go. And so now I've changed it to push button. You can see that it's now a dot there. Look, I can simulate exactly the same as I was doing in live view. And so that is the power of live view and simulation. So I do not need a single piece of physical hardware to start simulating things happening. The next thing to show you is, now that I've got this function block here called a switch, let's take a look at the app. So when you're in config, again, under this testing tab, there is this option here for web interface. And when you press that, it opens up your default web browser with the web interface. The web interface is almost identical to the app that you would see on a phone or a tablet. I can log in to the web interface. And when I log in, if I take a look here, there's nothing on functions yet. Okay, nothing on central. Rooms. Ah, I've got a room called not assigned. If I go in there, I've got something called switch. Oh, wow. That also turns that output on and off. Cool. So you can see there that by adding a function block, we now also have something on our user interface, on our app. And that's because it is function blocks that are shown on the app, not inputs, not outputs, but these things. And we can tell that because on the parameters of the function block, we have a tick box here in use. And that means that it is used in the user interface. Cool. Just going to quickly check my notes to make sure I've gone over everything I wanted to. I think I just about have. Two more things for me to finish before I just show you the last few slides. The first one is how do we know exactly what each function block does? Well, that is actually really, really simple. When you've got a function block on a page, there is a little eye just here in the top right of it. And if you select that, it opens up the documentation for that function page. So switch is an on-off switch with a trigger to toggle as well as on and off. It then shows us all of the available inputs and what they do, the available outputs and what they do, and any parameters for it. And on some function blocks, we even get a little chart that explains how that function block works. Now, if you take a look here, you'll see that on the documentation, it says that we've got more inputs than just trigger. It says that we've got TR, R, O, and DIS, but I can only see TR there. And the reason is we hide a lot of the less commonly used inputs. And if you want to see them, you just have to press this little white plus here, and you can then tick them to use them. So that is inputs and outputs. And then final thing I want to show you in config before we finish today's session is how we do a little bit more advanced configuration on the mini server. Because at the moment, all we have done is connect this mini server and save a config file into it. I want to potentially change the name of this mini server. I potentially want to change its time zone or its network settings. To do that, I select it in the periphery list. Then at the ribbon along the top, I choose Configure Mini Server. And on this, it gives me the ability to change the name of the mini server, so how it appears in the app, to change the mini server location. I can also, if I've put a street and a city and a country code at the very minimum in, I can press determine automatically, and it will pull the longitude, latitude, and elevation of this mini server. And that is used for certain things like dusk and dawn, sunrise, sunset. I can also set the time zone for a mini server. Now, this is really important. We're an Austrian company, so every mini server comes out of the factory as Europe/Vienna. Please don't manually change the time to be UK time. All you have to do is change this to Europe/London. On this next tab, I can choose between whether it automatically gets an address from the network or whether I want to statically assign one. I would recommend a static assignment, otherwise you're going to have trouble connecting with your app. And then on the third tab, we can change some settings related to remote access, what ports the mini server is on, and whether we're using the Loxone free DNS service or whether we're using a third-party DNS service like DyneDNS. And then we can apply and send those details to the mini server. It then reboots. Brilliant. And there we go. It's now rebooted. And you'll see that when it rebooted, it disconnected me. So I just need to remember to reconnect afterwards. And there we go. I'm connected back in. Another really cool thing is if I were connected to the mini server and I selected it in the periphery list, you'll see that on the demo case, the LED starts flashing rapidly. And that is to give me a visual indication that this is the thing that I've selected in config. Wonderful. So that about covers it for today's session in config. Something that you could try out on your own if you wanted to is try out other inputs, how I could have maybe two-way switching with two inputs on a mini server. So how I could make this LED turn on with this input and then turn back off with the second input and vice versa. So just like you'd have two-way switching in a large room. Maybe try and figure that out for tomorrow. Other than that, if I just move back to the slideshow to just finish up with a few slides on here. So the highlights of today. So as I said, all config files, all projects, you can save locally on your laptop / on the cloud, as well as being saved into the mini server. The front page of your config file shows your projects that are on that PC, as well as the ability to create new projects. Remember to choose the correct mini server when you create a project. Don't choose a Go if it's a Gen 1. Don't choose a Gen 1 if it's a mini server. Remember to change the password from admin. Really, really important. Room sizes in meters squared. Really, really important for the heating logic later on. In the actual config file, it's separated into 3 panes. Left pane is your parameters of your selected object. Middle pane is your periphery list, and the right-hand pane is the actual logic and config that is on the mini server that makes things work. Input is something that has an effect on the mini server, and output is something that the mini server has an effect on. All configuration, you can test it in simulation without any hardware available. When you do have physical hardware, you have live view, so you can see what's happening in real life. You can also get an app. As soon as you have at least a mini server, you can see the app. And then finally, function blocks are the building blocks to greatness. With function blocks, you can make anything you want happen. And there is an example of live view and simulation. We'll come on to this as we start adding in peripherals, but you can see that in simulation, you can even simulate something like our touch switch and the different touch points on it. So really, really powerful tool. Finally, as always, config and our app are incredibly powerful. You can make just about anything happen with config. And as a testament to that, I've got an entire video series where I do show all of the various things you can make happen with config. And I've obviously been using a demo case today. I'll continue using this for the rest of the series. If you would like to get your hands on one of these, that is the person you need to contact. Please get in touch with Megan and she can get the ball rolling for you. We've got stock in the UK, so we can post them out from the UK for you, so they'll arrive with you within the next day or two, so you can actually have them for the rest of the webinar series. Other than that, that is today over and done with. Thank you everyone so much for joining. I hope you've enjoyed. As always, we will have 10 minutes at the end for any Q&As. See you again tomorrow. Goodbye, everyone.